Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Iconic Freedom, The Formula. Here we set a standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and your outcomes and everything that follows. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. So when I talk about the formula, we talk about that periodic chart that you see on the various websites that this is posted on, where you create those elements that come together and bring harmony to your life. And if one of those elements in your life is not working, then you extract it and you reevaluate it and, again, bring that harmony to your life. So every year on the 4th of July, right, Americans, all of us, we celebrate freedom and we celebrate independence and liberty. And, we celebrate, the birth of a nation unlike any other that existed before it. And truly setting a standard that no other nation had ever achieved or since. But perhaps I think the most revolutionary idea was not the independence itself, but I think the idea that ordinary people could govern themselves. I mean, at a time where everything was by ruler, right? By king, and all that kind of stuff. That freedom could exist not because rulers controlled the citizens, but because the citizens managed themselves. And that remains the great question today. Can we govern ourselves? Because freedom, I think, survives only where responsibility and accountability exists. We can only have a civil society if there is accountability for one's choices. And I think one of the greatest misunderstandings about freedom is the belief that freedom means nobody tells me what to do. Well, that's not freedom, that's adolescence, right? That's a teenager. But freedom is not the absence of restraint, but it's the presence of a self-restraint of sorts. A free person governs their own behavior. They manage their emotions, their impulses, their decisions, their choices, without requiring constant external correction. I don't look outside of myself for an entity to give me approval not to harm another person because it's against the nature of humanity. I mean, we know this. We know that it's part of our DNA. So I just wouldn't do that, right? Freedom is not sustained by the removal of limits, but it is sustained by the presence of your self-governance. And I think that's where the conversation becomes uncomfortable because many people say they want less government. Okay, excellent. Show me your self-governance. Show me your honesty. Show me your consistency. Show me your accountability. Show me your responsibility. Show me your ability to keep your word. How about your willingness to own mistakes? That's where accountability is taking ownership. Because every reduction in external governance requires an increase in internal governance. That's the trade. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the more you take care of self, let each care for self and all will be cared for, the less government needs to take care. And what do we know about those that self-govern? You pay the bill, you make the rule. Well, if government is paying the bill, they're going to make the rules. And that is the trade. That's always been the trade, right? The less you govern yourself, the more someone else has to. Now, before anybody becomes defensive, if you're starting to have a defensive feeling right now, this is not a political statement. This is a reality statement because every relationship works in this way. Every family works this way. every organization, every society. The less self-governance present, the more external governance becomes necessary. And this brings us to something that Iconic Freedom, the formula, has always been about. This is about standards. I say it every week. This is about creating a standard. People talk about freedom, they talk about independence, they talk about individual rights, but very few people talk about standards. And I would say standards of consistency. But self-governance without a standard is pretty much impossible because you have nothing to hold up to it, to be able to say, this is the standard, this is what we're going to do as a society, this is what I do as an individual, this is what we do as a family, this is what we do as a city, as a state, as a nation, as a world. What standard governs your choices? What standard governs your word? What standard governs your behavior, your integrity, your relationships? Because a standard allows you to measure yourself without requiring someone else to do it for you. I don't need somebody outside of myself to affirm me and who I am and what I do. That standard belongs to me. And if you don't have a standard, what exactly are you governing? I mean, who are you governing? If it's not yourself, then it's outside of yourself, which means you're trying to control people. See, I think people who refuse to establish a standard inevitably become governed by circumstances. And if you don't establish some sort of standard for yourself, I think life is going to establish one for you. One way or another, in the words of Debbie Harry, one way or another. Because nature does not tolerate a vacuum. The absence of a standard is not freedom. It's drift. It's roaming. It's being lost. And eventually drift becomes dependency. And dependency invites governance and government from somewhere else. Now, consider it for a moment that most people think freedom is the goal. But freedom without a standard cannot sustain itself. Freedom requires character. It requires responsibility. It requires accountability, the ownership. Freedom requires self-governance. The idea of freedom is that any character is simply self-governance made visible. Right? Because people often talk about character as though it's something mysterious, but it's not. It is what happens when your actions consistently align with your standards. People talk about empathy. Well, empathy is not about your emotion. Empathy is about your responsibility, the actions that you take for which you are responsible and accountable. Character says, tell the truth, honor your commitments, own your mistakes, fulfill your obligations, do what you said you would do. Not because someone's watching you, because it's your standard. The externally governed person will ask, well, what are all the rules? Because, I want to follow the rules. The self-governed person, I think, will say, what is my standard? What is my formula? What is my standard for doing what I think works for me internally? Not trying to force other people into my universe. What works for me? I don't need to make you wrong to do something right for me. And I think that is the distinction that changes everything. Because laws themselves can, they really reveal something important. Most people view law as restriction. But really, many laws exist because some people refuse to govern themselves. A person with integrity doesn't need a law to tell them don't steal, don't defraud, don't harm others, don't violate agreements. They already possess an internal standard. A law is society's attempt to externally impose what should have been internally governed. The most self-governed people require the fewest laws. The most self-governed people require the fewest laws. Write that down. Not because they're above the law, but because they've internalized their standard. Now, does this mean that laws are bad? It doesn't mean government is bad. It means something, I think, much simpler. Let's say it that way. That the highest form of governance is self-governance. Every form of governance exists to compensate for its absence. Parents govern children because children have not yet learned how to manage themselves, teach their own self-governance. Teachers will govern classrooms, right? Because students are learning their own self-governance, how to manage themselves. Managers will govern employees because not everyone demonstrates the ability to self-governance. Governments govern societies because not everyone practices self-governance. The question underneath all of it remains the same. Can this person govern themselves? Because if they can, external becomes less necessary. If they cannot, external inevitably is going to expand and expand and expand. And this is what I think the founders understood. The founders did not simply distrust government, they understood something deeper, and that is that a free society requires citizens capable of governing themselves. Without responsibility, freedom will weaken. Without accountability, freedom will weaken. Without character, freedom will weaken. Without standards, freedom weakens. And without self-governance, freedom eventually becomes impossible to sustain. You can't have a civil society with people that are not self-governing, because someone will always step into the vacuum left by those of irresponsibility. Freedom is not self-sustaining. It requires maintenance. Not by government, but by citizens, by individuals, by people needing to be willing to own their choices and the outcomes, to self-evaluate and self-correct. And maybe that's the real meaning of Independence Day. Not freedom from responsibility, freedom through responsibility. Not freedom from accountability, freedom through accountability. Not freedom from standards, but freedom through standards. Because I think freedom survives only where responsibility exists. Civility becomes part of the fabric of a society where accountability exists. Every year Americans celebrate freedom, but freedom was never the miracle. I think the miracle was the belief that ordinary people could govern themselves. What an extraordinary thought at that time in our development. That you could figure it out for yourself. The question isn't whether freedom still exists. The question is whether we remain capable of freedom. Because freedom requires something of us. This is the workflow of nature, if you will. Your decision motivates you to a choice, which makes you responsible. You have to have the ability to respond to the choice, and you are now accountable for whatever the outcomes are. This creates your character. This creates your integrity. This demonstrates your self-governance. Okay, so now here's my question. What is your standard?
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people
to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another,
and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them.
A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men,
deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends,
it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it,
and to institute new government.
laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form.
As to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Prudence, indeed, would dictate that governments long established
should not be changed for light and transient causes.
And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable.
Than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism,
it is their right, it is their duty
to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies.
And such is now the necessity
which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America,
In General Congress, assembled,
appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions,
do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies,
solemnly publish and declare
that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be,
free and independent states,
that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown,
and that all political connection
between them and the state of Great Britain
is and ought to be
totally dissolved.
and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war,
conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce,
and to do all other acts and things
which independent states may of right do.
and for the support of this declaration,
With a firm reliance
on the protection of divine providence,
We mutually pledge to each other
Our lives,
our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
The King of Great Britain dictated the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the 13 colonies. Our fate under his rule was evident. Therefore, our nation's architects found declaring independence to be worth their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor.
freedom is common sense. It is our constant, steadfast message to the world, a belief that has inspired us to greatness and shaped our destiny. In America, our home, we are free, we are equal, we are united. In America, I am home.
We are home.
and we
will cherish and defend
our home, sweet home.
We are grateful for a land so fair. Our excellence is not an exception. It is a prevailing attitude. We are a nation determined to realize dreams. Independence, it is ours, just as sure as our title is Americans.